Fantastic. We've got folks coming in now, so we will we'll give everybody a minute or so to get settled and get prepped, and then we'll kick everything off. But everything good for a Thursday so far with you, Rosalyn? Anything crazy
Yeah,
going on today?
it's going well. It feels like summer here in California. It is 85 degrees in the South Bay. And then I think in 2 days, I think it's going to drop back down to like 60. So
Oh,
it's typical kind of Bay Area weather. We're spoiled here. I can't complain at all. I have no right to complain when it comes to weather.
well, usually I could say like, yeah, it's April 1st in Atlanta and everything's nice and warm. We have had the weirdest little like cold spell come through, and it's like in the 40s, I think, right now, 40s or
Oh.
50s. So, but last week it was in the 70s and 80s. So who knows? But either way, it's the opening day of baseball season, so we've got our jerseys on and we're ready to roll.
Very
So
cool.
everybody, I can almost guarantee you a little bit of the productivity of my team has gone down. The Braves' first pitch was about 30 minutes ago, so I got to
Oh.
go yell at people here in a few minutes, but we will we will survive. So it
So
looks like yeah,
we'll
I know.
we'll be fine if you get distracted and kind of look over and check out the score and see what's
Yeah,
happening.
yeah. If I go silent for any reason, it's probably because the school. So you might hear a yell in the background. There might be a home run. I don't know. So, but like
Very cool.
we have a lot of folks jumping in, a lot of folks here in Atlanta. We'll say hey to
Awesome.
Joff and Morgan and a lot of other folks that we know, but we'll get things kicked off. So excited to have you on Shop Talk today. And again, of course, everybody that's jumping in now as attendees, thank you all so much for joining. If it's your first Shop Talk episode, welcome. We're excited to have you. As always, we wouldn't be here without the partnership that we have with our friends over at Salesforce for helping us make this episode every other week and really elevating and bringing operations professionals and the queen of RevOps herself today being on with us with Rosalyn. So we're so appreciative of the sponsorship and the continued support from our team over at Salesforce. So thank you, Jen, and everyone for constantly making us all better. But again, today we're so excited to have Rosalyn join us. I'm sure for everyone that's joining, very familiar with Rosalyn, at least from a lot of her thought leadership that she brings every day to us on LinkedIn and through a lot of other mediums. We'll talk about some of those mediums in a little bit. But again, for those that don't know Rosalyn, I'm going to let her introduce herself in a little bit. But we're so excited to have you on again. This topic today being so near and dear to you and I's heart so much of making this big shift of tactical to strategic from a RevOps perspective. But before we get too far down the road, Rosalyn, so excited to have you. I'll let you introduce yourself and tell us a little
Yeah.
bit more about you and your background.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. Super excited to be here. I'm super pumped. I love your background, everything on it, Salesforce, Sonar, Wizards. Love all of it. Definitely, I'm happy to be here. As you said, I've been running, go to market and RevOps for about 2 decades now. Yeah, since 2000. So it's been a long time, but have really been always on the operations side. I started very early on in finance, kind of moved over to the ops side, the dark side, as we call it, on the sales side, and have been there pretty much ever since. But I love everything operations. Big company, small company. I think a lot of folks like, obviously Brad, my background. I've worked in lots of mid-sized to large public companies, worked in a number of startups, SaaS startups. Now I'm currently the head of revenue operations at Clari, which is really interesting being a RevOps platform. Being the RevOps leader for RevOps platform has been really interesting. But yeah, just super happy to be here. And looking forward to, kind of breaking down this topic a little bit.
Fantastic. Yeah, like I said, we've and for those of y'all who don't know this, I'm sure a lot of folks do. Rosalind and I have known each other for years, have been on each other's podcasts and all of the other fun things that we do to help drive awareness to the RevOps world. And so again, having you on here was such a perfect fit for us, especially to drive into this topic of how do we think about getting RevOps more strategic? I think we all in our operations careers have started in a tactical manner. Let's roll our sleeves up and let's be honest, even as we move into strategic roles, there's still times we roll our sleeves up and we really get in and start building. But to set the stage for that, we'll go ahead and start our polling question. We always want to hear from our audience. For everybody that's jumping on and joining us, please, I'll go ahead and launch the poll now. But do you think your RevOps role is more tactical or strategic? I just opened the poll. So for those that are on right now, please cast your vote. We'll share the results here in a second. but please do that. And as always, please use the questions, the Q&A, the chat. We love hearing from you all. This is one of those times where we all get to sort of catch our breath, relax, keep it conversational. So if you have questions along the way, by all means, please drop them in the Q&A. So what's funny, looking at these votes come in, it looks like we've had about 66% of folks do their vote so far. It's a healthy mix. Tactical being 61%, strategic being 6%, and then of course the both option, because again we live in that world where we have to zoom in and zoom out. So a healthy mix along the way, but again, it looks like a lot of folks are on the tactical side and the conclusive tactical and strategic side. So that's fantastic. We'll leave the poll open for a couple of folks that are still trickling in, but we'll go ahead and kick things off. I know we have a lot to talk about today. So, as people were reaching out to us, throughout the week talking about this topic, we had a couple of tactical questions come up. I'll set the expectation very quickly. We will be talking about moving from tactical to strategic. So if you're looking for, advice on potentially building a validation rule or workflow rule or flow or anything like that in systems, it probably won't come. I hate to burst your bubble, but you will get a lot of insights especially from Rosalyn, on how do we take some of those tactical pieces and move them into strategic plays for our business. So, but before we do that, Rosalyn, we were catching up earlier, you have a really interesting perspective and theory about how we should break this down into 3 specific buckets. So let's start there, about how you even start to think about the tactical and strategic side of things in these 3 different buckets that you talked about.
Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to kind of go through that. I think from my perspective, I mean, like you mentioned, our job is always a big mix of tactical and strategic, right? No matter what level you're at, whether you're just starting out, you're an analyst, you're a manager, you're a director, you're a VP, whatever your role is, there's tons of tactical things that we're going to be doing all the time in operations. But so how do you sort of uplift and get sort of out of the tactical and move yourself more into the strategic? So I think about it in a couple of different buckets, as you mentioned, Brad. One, obviously, you've got to get the time, right? You need to free up your time to be able to start being more strategic. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And that's really what I call sort of getting your house in order, right? Getting the infrastructure built so that you can actually have time to start being more proactive and less reactive. The second bucket I think about is building your knowledge, right? Because in order to be forward thinking and to be strategic, you have to empower yourself, right? And have the knowledge and expertise around the business and the strategy and some of the other things we can talk about as well, in order to position yourself in a way that you can think strategically when you're approaching things. And then the last bucket to me is sort of the kind of the go between the two, as you're getting your house in order, as you're building up your knowledge. And even though you've got to get through the day to day and get your job done, you can start to adjust your way of thinking, right? And that's sort of how I think about getting your mindset in the right state. And you can always start small, and we'll go through some of those details as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I agree. I think those 3 buckets are perfect. The time side of it, getting your house in order. I think we've all been there where we either start in a new RevOps role and it's like, all right, I just inherited this house. So how messy is it? How much cleaning am I going to actually have to do?
That's right.
But I think that building knowledge, empowering yourself is so big as that second bucket, like, because you're going to start, and even if you're new to the company or just new to the role, you're still starting there. But you have to build that knowledge repository just for yourself of how this company works and how you support it.
That's right.
And then you're right, that mindset, that go between, just getting that mindset in the right state is perfect. So when you think of, have you seen this shift happen already, that these RevOps folks are moving from tactical strategic? I know you and I have just catching up so far, so much in the past, we've made that sort of tactical strategic initiative or that shift, but how have you seen that shift happen for RevOps folks?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think more and more you're hearing the term revenue operations, right? And people always ask me like, oh, is this new? What is it? And I'm like, it's not new. There's always been people running your go-to-market operations. As long as there's been sales, as long as there's been marketing, somebody has been taking care of your processes, your systems, your policies, and making the boat run, making the ship run, making whatever the train run, whatever it is, whatever vehicle you're on, moving 100 miles per hour. But I think about really getting, because there's sort of this rise of revenue operations, I think more companies and organizations and leadership, are starting to recognize that it really is a powerful, I call it the secret weapon, right? I think operations is the secret weapon. And if it's done correctly, it can be really that strategic differentiator to help you not only not only support your day-to-day business, but it's all about the insights and the data to be able to see what's coming and be able to kind of see around the corners, see those blind spots. And then once being able to identify those and then identify how you're going to pivot. And then it's again up to operations to go and actually execute, right? On once you pivot and decide on a new plan or new whatever it is, it's operations that's going to now go implement it, drive the adoption, have the data flow through the systems, all of that. So if you think about, definitely there's a mind shift there, but that's where sort of maybe we could talk a little bit about some of the buckets and go into a little bit more detail. If I think about, kind of freeing up your time, because again, we're bombarded with day-to-day tasks, right? And it's Thursday today, and it's very easy to have the whole week go by without actually tackling any of the bigger projects, because just the fires, right, that you have could easily consume 8 to 10 hours a day. Easily. So I think that's where it's, getting your house in order. And I think, Brad, you mentioned about how we've all been there, right? Where we join a new company, you're like, oh, we have stages. Oh, we have forecast categories. Oh, we have all this great tech, right? We have all the brand name technology. But when you get there and you start kind of, you see that little loose thread and you kind of start pulling, right? And everything starts to kind of unravel, or you realize that your house is not, made of bricks. It's really cards, and you kind of pull one thing out and things start tumbling down. So we've all been there. So I think, when you join, it's all about getting your house in order, right? It's getting the bare bones, basics, foundational elements built so that you can start, getting things kind of cranking in a way that now you can start actually popping your head up and being able to look around and see what's happening when you're not buried in fires, right? Because if you're always buried in fighting fires, you're never going to get proactive or get in front of it. So getting your house in order, and then of course, there's no silver bullet to that either, but it's the building blocks, right? It's making sure that you have processes in place. They're going to be iterative, especially in a high growth startup, they're going to be iterative. So just get a framework in place for today. Know that you're going to continue to build off of it. Make sure you have clear policies, right? So many times there's been, you don't really understand, your rules of engagement, the handoffs between the teams. And there's so much, right, in operations that you have to think about. But if you think about getting your policies, your processes, your data, that's like the first thing, right, is trying to get your data cleaned up and getting the right definitions and such. But if you think about the data, the policies, process, the systems, and try to get all of that sort of at least in a condition where it's not on fire, right? Where, and you're not band-aiding everything, right? But stop the bleeding and then start some infrastructure in place that's actually scalable and repeatable. Because as soon as you start to get sort of that infrastructure and baseline, then you can start to now I can pop my head up and start to think about, longer term and such. So, and it's funny because you keep smiling because I know exactly, you're like, oh my gosh, I've been there. My house has been on fire all the time. This room's on fire, and then I put it out and that room's on fire. Then you go to the kitchen and that's on fire. But I mean, I think we're, as operations folks, we all know that that's sort of our day-to-day, but we don't want to be always fighting fires, right? Or putting out, stopping the bleeding or whatever. We want to be able to actually optimize, enable, and be a little bit more forward thinking. So I think definitely getting that house in order is kind of your first step.
Oh, well.
Yeah. and then I think do you want to kind of talk about the next bucket? Kind of the empowering absolutely. Knowledge. Okay. So if I think about, as you're getting your house in order, and now you've got to get sort of your mind, your brain going, right? in terms of thinking about, really empowering your knowledge of the business, right? Because in order to be strategic, and you think about process, policy, all of that, you have to understand many elements of the business in order to optimize how you design those things, right? So I think about, a couple of things that I always ask operations folks to make sure that they really understand is obviously the strategy, right? So what's your go-to-market strategy, right? What's your company, your corporate strategy, and really understanding that strategy and how your business like literally goes to market, right? If you think about it, ideally your RevOps leader is the one who creates it, right? Created it, to define the go-to-market strategy in partnership with your CRO or whomever your C-suite leaders are. But even if you didn't, like even if you're not at that level where you're the one driving the strategy, it's still super important, right, for you to understand what the strategy is, what are the key objectives, what are the targets, right? How are we, what are the initiatives that we're going to put in place to help us hit those objectives or those goals? Think about, who's responsible, and all of the metrics that matter, because I think if you understand the strategy, then you can start to understand how you're going to build your to support it, right? From a people, process, and technology perspective. And I think about the strategy. The other thing I think is really important to understand is your product. From an operations perspective, I mean, you've got to know your product better than anyone. And I've worked in companies where it's super technical, and I can only do the elevator pitch. Like, I cannot get into the deep dive because it's just way above my head and way above my brain capacity in terms of product. But you've got to at least understand, even if you don't understand the technical workings of your product, you've got to understand sort of what does your product solve? Like, what are the business problems it solves? What's the value to your prospects? How is the product sold? Who do you sell it to, right? Because if you think about marketing and enablement, you think about who are you selling to, who needs it, who buys it, right? And really understand who your target personas are and how you sell the product, because that's going to enable you to drive the right processes and the right systems to support it. I also think about, in terms of product, like, who your competitors are, right? Who you're selling against, and sort of how your product is different from others, and understand the product roadmap, because as the product roadmap, whatever's coming for your sellers, you're going to need to enable that from an operations perspective. The other parts of strategy, product, I think the other piece for me is really understanding the business, really understanding sort of that business inside and out, right? I remember one of my VPs told me a long time ago that I should know our business and know our customers better than the sales reps. Right. And so I think I really took that to heart, because I think if you really understand the business, you understand, the marketing strategy, how you create pipeline, what your selling motion looks like, what your market segmentation is, right? What your deal process looks like, what your deal cycle looks like, sort of that end to end, from top of funnel through expansion and renewal. If you understand that business process, then you're going to be better enabled and better positioned to support it. So those are sort of kind of the big buckets. I think product, strategy, and understanding the business. Within those, obviously, there's a ton of stuff, but I think those are the big ones to just try to, educate yourself, so that you're going to be able to not only support from an operations perspective, but start providing those insights and providing that data to help drive some decisions.
Yeah, you're spot on. It's so interesting. The one thing that I'll just kind of like double click into real quick is knowing about your product, knowing about your business. I think so many, I hate to say this, but even Colin put a great article out about, like, what is RevOps today. It was a fantastic thing that hit LinkedIn. And it's one of those things, like, I think so many people think RevOps is a glorified Salesforce admin. Like, oh, cool, they're going to go in and add the products over there. Like, yeah, they're going to add the products, but they have to know what the context of those products are. And
That's right.
I think when you start to find these just phenomenal RevOps leaders and sales ops leaders that can come in and say, and be suggestive, and this is kind of that uplift, right, that we'll talk about in a second, of getting this uplift from tactical strategic. When you know about the business and you're able to provide that insight to the rest of the team, to the sales team, to the marketing team, hey, it looks like you have this one opportunity and they're using product B. Have you talked with them about, negotiating to product C and maybe giving a little bit better of a discount, give them more, you get more? When you as a RevOps person get to start putting your strategic hat on it, show how much you know about the business, it's just, you get that sense of, one, satisfaction that you're helping the business move and growing revenue, of course, which we all want, but you clearly get a lot of pats on the back from the rest of the business, right? Like, wow, that was actually very, very helpful.
You start earning that respect, right? And start being seen as that advisor, where people will now come to you and ask you, right? How should I set up this product? How's the best way for us to sell? What are you seeing? When you think about the product, like, what are you seeing from the customers, like from customer behaviors? Are they buying this? Is this messaging resonating, right? There's all these questions, because from an ops perspective, we are the closest to the day-to-day. We're the closest to the customer, to the prospect, to the sales team, to the marketing. We're really the eyes and ears of the business. And I think this, as operations professionals start to see themselves in that light and understand that, hey, I own the keys to the castle, right? I am the conductor on this train. And once we start kind of seeing ourselves that way, I think that will start to enable us to, really think about and kind of uplift, ourselves in that process. Because I think the product hierarchy one is a really good example, because when we're introducing new products, we should be thinking about what's the best way to structure, how is it going to be quoted, how are we going to sell to the customer, how is this going to be positioned, and then we can figure out the best way to set it up in the system, the best user experience for the sales rep, right? What do I need from marketing in terms of collateral and content? What's the messaging, that my sales team needs? What enable them? So you think about, this sort of mental list of all the to-dos, right? As soon as somebody says, oh, we're going to introduce X, and my brain immediately starts to think of all the, 50 things that we're going to have to do, right? To enable this. And then you have all these questions. And so I think the more that we can start to get in front of that and educate ourselves, the better equipped not only we're going to be to support from a systems and process perspective, but also, as you said, being that person that they say, oh, I've got to go talk to, I've got to go talk to Brad. I've got to go talk to Rosalyn, like right away, as soon as I have an idea, because they're going to bounce ideas with me and be that thought leader to tell me I'm totally off base, I'm crazy, or I'm good. I'm going to go ahead and get some support.
Yeah, you're spot on. I think the one thing that I always revert back to, I like to think, um, in my RevOps journey when I was getting pulled in a million different directions, right? We always have fires we're putting out,
Yep.
but the times where you feel the most rewarded sense of satisfaction, it's when you become that strategic counterpart to the rest of the business. And there's
Mhm.
no better feeling than you're in that RevOps seat, whether it be tactical or strategic, when that executive comes to you and says, hey, we've got a board meeting in 2 weeks. I know you're so close to the business and you see all the ins and outs. Can you help me run this report? How did we do last quarter with X, Y, and Z?
Mhm.
And they wouldn't ask you that question if they didn't already have that vote of confidence for you that, look, you are so in tune with how the business is performing. Yes, you
Mhm.
measure everything. Yes, you get to see all the reports and how everybody's doing, but that's one of those senses of like, all right, I get to have that strategic feel and push to the company. So
That's right.
it's
I know. It's like the best feeling when like your team won't even go to your CRO or your CEO or CMO or whoever without going to you first, right? It's that whole chief of staff mindset. It's like they know that if they go to the CRO, they're just going to point them back to your ops, to your RevOps leader. So knowing that, they kind of got to get through you to get to anybody else and be that strategic advisor. And I love that board example. And I would even take it one step further, where I would love for all of us to sort of be in that position where the CEO or the CRO comes to you and says, okay, we have a board meeting coming up. What should our story be? Right, around go to market, right? For our CRO to say, hey, what should my story be? And you start building, okay, this is the story, this is the storyline. And of course, you have all the data and everything to support that, like you were saying, but also be that person that actually starts writing the board note, figuring out what we want to tell the board, what do we not want to tell the board, what's our story going to be, and what are we going to tell them for next quarter, what's going to happen next quarter. It's that foresight. And I think, obviously there's so many things you've got to do day to day. So trying to, again, bubble your head up and get to that level. But I guess that's my wish for everybody in operations, is to get to that level where you are that person that's designing what's going to be told at the board level.
absolutely. And if there's anything, hopefully a lot of nuggets that get taken away from this today, but if there's anybody, that's listening to this now or watching the recording, when you think of, how do you elevate yourself to that? Well, now we're talking about having that great sense of satisfaction when we get asked questions about, like, we're going to go present this to the board. Think a step or two ahead. And we've talked about this before, where it's,
Yeah.
you know, you already see the insights. If you can think one step ahead and you can go to your CEO or CRO or CMO proactively and say, hey, I'm seeing this trend. For
Mhm.
whatever reason, when we go head to head with this competitor, here's our outcome. I wanted to point you, set a goal for yourself every week, every month, every quarter. Figure out 1 or 2 or 3 ways that you can go and bring that extra value. And I can promise you it doesn't go unheard or unseen. And so that's what we talk about. But I know you've had a couple of other thoughts of like extra steps that you can take just through your daily practice where you zoom out.
Mhm.
Any other quick nuggets that we can share? And I'll say it real quick to everybody that's still on. I know we got about 5 minutes or so left. Feel free to drop questions in. We'll use the last couple of minutes. Time flies when you're having fun, as always. But um, yeah, feel free to drop any questions in. But yeah, those extra steps. Any other extra steps you think you can take in the RevOps career to
Yeah,
elevate?
no. Yeah, definitely. And I think that sort of fits into sort of that bucket of thinking about, just getting into the right mindset. right? And Brad, I think you touched on this, kind of thinking about those couple of things. Just put a couple of things aside, right? Every time you're thinking about it, take the extra, it doesn't have to be hours of work, right? It could be just the extra 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it is, and just sort of go that extra step, that extra mile, right? We talk a lot about, making sure that if somebody comes to you with an issue, that you're not just responding to the task, right? You're understanding what the business problem is, what's the challenge, what's the use case, what are we trying to solve, so that you're able to sort of get to that next level. So sort of in those baby steps around, you mentioned about, instead of like providing reports, provide insights, right? Instead of like just, reporting the data, analyze the data and tell, what the data is telling us, like tell the story, right? There's little things like, instead of like, implementing a tool, right? Think about what it is that you're trying to solution, right? And don't be just sort of that first line support, kind of help desk. There's days where I feel like I should have a ticket taker where I'm just like help desk support, getting people access and such. But, you don't want to be that. You want to be the advisor. So I think, instead of like just calculating commissions, for example, right? Understand the comp design, understand the incentive, right? What are we trying to do? Instead of, just rolling up the forecast, run the forecast, see what's happening with the forecast and be able to really talk about what's changed and what's happening and analyze the data. Yeah, there's just tons of like little steps that I think if you just take the extra time to kind of think about, how can you better serve whoever that customer is? And it doesn't have to be like hours and hours of work. It doesn't have to be tons of investment or tons of money. It's just kind of starting to shift your mindset into the right stage or the right way of thinking, and you'll slowly get there, right? I mean, it's not going to happen overnight, but let's just if everyone can just take a few steps every day, every week, right? We're going to get there. We'll all get there.
Yep. It's that third bucket. It's all about the mindset.
Mhm.
We did actually have a quick question come in, and I love this.
Yeah.
It's our good friend Jonathan Morgan here in Atlanta.
Hey,
But
Jonathan.
you know, how do you recommend ops teams maintain focus on the long term, especially because there's so many urgent items that are in the sea of urgent items and fires.
Yeah.
Just maintaining that focus. What tips do we have there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're probably all really good at doing this, is around, setting, setting the goals, setting KPIs, understanding the big things. And I always think about like every task, every ask, how does it align back to the overall go-to-market strategy, right? If those tasks are things that are going to directly impact our top, our 3 to 5 go-to-market strategy sort of goals or KPIs or SGIs, whatever you want to call them, then those get prioritized, right? You've got to focus on that. And anything that drives, anything that affects customers, prioritize as well. But I think all the other stuff, anything that's not tied to go-to-market strategy, not tied to revenue, not tied to a customer, and are going to be like a lot of those nice to haves. And those are going to go to the bottom. Sorry, but they're going to the bottom of the bucket, even if they are quick wins.
Yep. Yeah, you're spot on. And that's one of the things we've talked about this on a couple other episodes too. But one of the biggest things you can always do is have this phenomenal art of saying no. And it's
Yes.
saying no eloquently, politely, and with respect. But again, if it's not driving to your OKRs, if it's not driving to your KPIs, or however you're putting your company goals together, it's
Hmm.
not to say that it's not important, but one of our core values, optimize for outcomes. Like we're going to make
Yep.
sure that every optimization we make has an outcome to it. Because if it's a quick ask or if it's a small fire and it's not really going to affect our total outcome, it's not to say it's not important, but we're not going to necessarily optimize for that. So
That's right.
uh,
And I would add just that I always say kind of, yeah, I always say yes, but right. Instead of kind of the no, it's like, yes, but, or yes, when these things happen, or yes, try to kind of position it that way would be my recommendation, is just kind of yes, and maybe it's not now. Right. Or yes, if these things happen, or yes, when these things happen, or whatever the context is. Because everything's important. We know everything's important, but we have to prioritize because we're not going to get to everything.
you're spot on. You're spot on. I know we're getting close to the top of time. I know we have a couple extra questions. We'll
Yeah.
try to stay on for a minute or so after, but I know some folks have to jump. So we always like to ask a couple of quick questions at the very end, a little bit of rapid fire. We were joking earlier, we know what these kind of are. We use them most of the time, but I usually always ask, what's something interesting you're doing more in your spare time? What are you watching on Netflix? But I know you're
You
working
know,
around the clock. I know
You,
that you don't watch too much.
I was gonna say, you know me well enough that you know I don't watch TV.
I know,
But
I know.
I don't, yeah, it
Um,
was weird joking
but
that I don't watch TV, I don't sleep. But I mean, for me right now, my free time, aside from, obviously family and work and everything else kind of going on, I am like on a mission to really elevate RevOps. And so if anybody's on this call, let's go out and do it. Right. I mean, I think there's a whole movement right now. There's a lot of energy. And I think that there's a lot of interest. And this is the time for us to really make our mark.
you're absolutely right. It's a big wave. We're all riding it. Let's all ride it together and make it even bigger. And that's our
Yeah.
goal, and that's our mission with WizOps and everything else we do. Biggest question, I know, kind of a loaded question, but favorite podcast you're listening to right now? I have to ask.
Well, I'm selfishly going to self-promote my own podcast, which, by the way, Brad has already recorded as a guest. So we'll be launching that pretty soon here too. But yeah, the Revenue Engine podcast launched about a month ago. And anybody who's like on the call too, if you're interested in participating in any webinars, panels, and be on the podcast, hit me up. Don't send me LinkedIn messages. My LinkedIn message box is terrible. Email me. Just email me, because there's no way. My LinkedIn is a nightmare.
I love it. Yeah, I'm right there with you. Admittedly, my LinkedIn inbox is a little out of control. We
It's
do have one
crazy.
final. I know, I know. We have one final question. We do it with all of our guests, and I'll put my Rosalyn face on real quick.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
and I'll put a
That is
Braves hat
really
on for you as
scary.
well. I'll put the Braves hat on for you as well, since we're in Brave season. But one thing we always like to ask is, what if you were to rewind the clock, you fire up the DeLorean, and you're starting your RevOps career today? What advice would you give yourself if you're just starting on your RevOps journey?
Yeah, definitely. So I have tons of advice from my younger self, because I did a lot of things that I would have done differently. But I think the biggest thing for me, and I still think this even today, I tell myself this all the time, is just the things that make you uncomfortable, go do them. Right. I think I wish I had done that a lot more and been a lot more brave, if you will, and kind of fearless when I was younger, because the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to learn and you're going to move on. And I think the only way to really grow is to get in that uncomfortable zone.
Absolutely. I say it to our team all the time, be comfortable being uncomfortable. We're
That's right.
okay with be comfortable in your own skin and be ready to go attack the day. Go make a mistake. Please go make a mistake, and we can learn from it. We probably learn more from that than anything else. So
That's right.
um,
That's
uh,
perfect.
you're spot on. So good. I know we're a few minutes over time, and I know you got a busy day, got to get back to everything else and running shop over at Clari. Obviously, Rosalyn, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've loved growing this RevOps movement with you, and like I said, you're the queen of it right now. And we appreciate everything you're doing to elevate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. Definitely. If anybody has follow-up questions, always hit me up. I'm always happy to help.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. We'll let everybody get back to their day. Happy opening day for everyone, the baseball fans out there, and happy early spring. And we'll talk to you all in 2 weeks for our next episode. So thank you so much,
Thank
Rosalyn.
you.
Have a great
Thank
afternoon.
you.
Bye, everyone.